It's another hot summer evening in Coral Gables, Florida in August of 1977. Deborah Clark is a nurse working the night shifts at Coral Gables Hospital.
She's been sleeping all day, and she's still in her pajamas. A nice cup of tea should wake her up.
Deborah has an unexpected visitor.
It's someone she knows because she lets him in, but the visit turns sour.
Deborah and her visitor go to her bedroom. They argue. A shot is fired, and then he beats her to death.
"You have a sister named Debbie?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, she's been killed." And it was just like somebody grabs your heart and rips it right out of your chest.
Who was this attacker? A stranger who forced his way into her private rooms? Or someone Debbie knew, someone close to her?
No one knew what happened to Deborah Clark. It took 2 days to find her body.
Every homicide is tragic. Some are more brutal than others, and it was the brutality of this that kept it in my mind all these years.
It will take nearly 40 years before this vicious killer is finally caught. Coral Gables, Florida is a great place to be if you're an attractive young nurse in 1977. Deborah Pantola Clark is 23 years old, and people describe her as tall, slender, and blonde, with the appearance of an innocent child.
Deborah works at Coral Gables Hospital. It's just 20 minutes from downtown Miami.
Deborah is well liked at the hospital and makes friends quickly. She's also sharp and ambitious and plans to become a lawyer.
As a nurse, Deborah is already on a great career track, but she's an enterprising young woman, and she's always looking for new challenges.
Deborah Clark has a good job and nice friends in sunny Miami, a million miles away from the northern working-class town where she grew up. When Deborah Pantola is born on December 26, 1953 in Utica, New York, her home city has seen better days.
Utica is an industrial center at the foot of the Adirondack Mountains, over 200 miles from Manhattan. Now, by the end of the mid-20th century, the region was experiencing an economic downturn.
We had a good childhood. We didn't have a lot, but I think Debbie wanted more.
As mills and factories are closed, ambitious young people look elsewhere to find a more promising future.
Plus, Utica is 4 hours from New York City. Anyone with big city dreams is going to be leaving town as soon as they can.
Deborah's upbringing in Utica is modest. Her mother and stepfather both have children, so it's a busy blended household with up to 7 kids underfoot, and no money to spare.
Debbie got a new bike one time, and I'll never forget, her being so excited about having a brand new bike. I remember that being one of the bright moments in her life.
Deborah studies nursing at the local Mohawk Valley College in Utica and graduates in 1975.
Nursing is a portable job, and she can take it anywhere. It's a perfect ticket for someone with dreams of traveling and working wherever she wants.
Deborah's dreams of leaving Utica for a better life hit a speed bump when she marries a local man, Phil Clark, in the summer of 1973.
It's a classic starter marriage. She gets hitched to Phil Clark, takes his surname, and almost immediately sees that this might not have been such a great life move. Deborah used to tell her sister that Utica was a dead end, so it's not a shock to anyone when she tells her family she's moving to Miami.
So she went to the airport in Syracuse, left the car in the airport, jumped on a plane, and went to Miami.
Miami is booming. Deborah quickly gets a nursing job at Coral Gables Hospital. She wants more. She dreams of becoming a lawyer. She's not afraid of anyone.
One time, she got into a dispute with a senior doctor and recorded a meeting they had with an intermediary. It's clear when you hear Deborah's voice that she is one tough cookie.
You want me to go to another apartment, you're going to have to fire me because I won't go. I will document it all. Because if you want to fight, you'll have one.
It's amazing now to hear Deborah's voice. She's a strong-willed young woman who clearly knows how to stand up for herself. She's fearless, and she had plans to become a lawyer one day.
At 7 a.m. on Wednesday, August 3, 1977, Deborah finishes her shift as her colleague, Marianne LaRusso, is beginning hers.
Marianne recalled saying a quick hi-bye to Deborah as her friend clocked out.
The following day, Marianne gets a call from the hospital asking if she knows where Deborah is.
Turns out, Deborah didn't show up for her 11 p.m. shift the night before. Marianne is immediately worried for her friend. It's not like Deborah to miss work without notice.
When Marianne calls her home and gets no answer, her concern escalated right away.
Marianne keeps trying Deborah's phone number during the day, and that evening she goes over to Deborah's house. There's no answer at her door.
Marianne noticed that Deborah's car is still in the driveway and a light's on inside, but there's still no answer to her phone or when she knocks on the door.
It's way out of character for Deborah to drop out of sight without letting people know where she is.
The hospital calls Marianne again on the next day, Saturday, August 6th, to tell her that Deborah has missed a second shift in a row.
By now, Marianne is convinced that something bad's happened to her friend Deborah.
A nurse with a busy social life misses a shift, well, that happens all the time. But Deborah has been missing for 2 whole days without explanation. Marianne needs to find her colleague right now.
Just after 7:30 p.m., Marianne LaRusso calls 911. The operator dispatches uniformed police officer Thomas Guilfoyle to Deborah's residence.
Guilfoyle's a young cop. He's just 29. Tries the door. Still no answer. The door's locked and there's no signs of forced entry.
I talked to the witness again, and there was one light on in one room on the second story of the townhouse. She told me that was Deborah's bedroom, only light on in the house.
At this point, it's up to the police to determine whether or not to enter a home without permission. In this case, Deborah's unexplained absence and her friend's concern about her safety is more than enough reason to take a closer look.
I spoke with her friend, who was on the scene as well, and I went all around the house. I had to climb about an 8-foot wall to get into the patio.
Officer Guilfoyle climbs up onto a pergola to get a better look into Deborah Clark's front bedroom window.
I looked in and I saw a human body, which turned out to have been Deborah, lying on the bed. The bed was against the wall where the window was, so her head was towards me and she was lying sort of spread eagled on the bed.
Officer Guilfoyle pries open the slider door and goes inside.
From the appearance through a window, I assumed something bad had happened and she was probably dead.
It's summertime. There's a strong smell of death inside Deborah's apartment. Her body's lying on the bed, her chest, neck, and face are covered with dried blood.
Deborah Clark has been dead for 2 whole days, leaving plenty of time for her killer to get away. From a young age, Deborah Pantola dreams of escaping her drab upbringing in Utica, New York, and making something of herself in a big, glittering city somewhere fresh and new. She studies nursing, and after a brief failed marriage to a man who gives her the surname Clark, Deborah moves in 1975 to the exciting city of Coral Gables, Florida.
This is where Deborah's life gets a bit more complicated. She starts an affair with a prominent and flashy real estate salesman, Alan Bregman.
Alan Bregman is 36, and he's married. He works for his father, managing properties around Miami, and he lives in an upscale waterfront home in Miami Beach, down the street from Lagorce Country Club. Deborah's affair with Bregman goes on for about a year. In that time, Bregman promises to leave his 32-year-old wife Florence and marry Deborah. And together they can bring up his 2-year-old son Brandon.
Everybody thought they were going to get married. They went out, they acted like they were going to get married.
People say she's happy when she's with him, and she believes in their future together.
And then, so they say, something hit the fan and it all unraveled.
On the morning of August 3, 1977, Deborah crosses paths with her friend and fellow nurse, Marianne LaRusso. Deborah is coming off her night shift and Marianne is just starting her workday.
It's a brief hello goodbye. Nothing special, but this will turn out to be the last time Marianne ever sees her good friend Deborah Clark alive.
That evening, Deborah wakes up from her daytime sleep. Soon she'll get ready to go to work at Coral Gables Hospital again. She's still got her pajamas on when there's someone at the door.
It's her boyfriend, Alan Bregman.
Why did Alan Bregman come to Deborah's place that day? His wife Florence has learned that he is cheating on her. She's threatening divorce. Whatever he tells her then, Deborah does not take this news well.
The couple argues. They go into Deborah's bedroom.
We know from voice recordings of Deborah at work that she is very capable of standing up for herself. It seems certain that Alan Bregman would know he had his hands full if he started an argument with Deborah.
Crime scene investigators look for evidence that the victim fought back before they were killed. Detective Stephen P. McKelvey takes the lead at the scene.
Born in Miami in 1943, Detective McKelvey is a Vietnam vet turned cop. He makes a thorough search of the bedroom where Deborah's body was first found by Officer Guilfoyle.
The detectives were very accommodating for me, being a fairly new officer. They let me stay on the scene for almost 4 hours and observe and kind of assist a little bit, which doesn't always happen. So I learned a lot.
Coral Gables holds some of the wealthiest zip codes in the country. All eyes are going to be on this investigation.
The detectives will wait for the pathologist's report to confirm a cause of death. Deborah was shot in the chest and beaten repeatedly around her head area. She did not die immediately.
McKelvey will check Deborah's fingernails. Did she struggle? Was her killer injured in the fight?
She is in her bedroom, in her pajamas. There must have been a level of trust between Deborah and her killer.
A level of intimacy between Deborah and the killer might help to explain where there are no telltale signs of a struggle, such as bruising on the victim's arms or shoulders.
As the detective inspects Deborah's body, a tiny detail catches his eye. Officer Guilfoyle helps the detectives take a photo of the single black hair on Deborah's arm.
That's a clue that might have easily been overlooked. Deborah's a blonde. This hair is dark. Whoever this hair belongs to, it isn't her.
If this is a robbery gone wrong, the neighbors will worry that they might be next. But as McKelvey makes his sweep of the room, it doesn't appear at first that anything of value is missing.
The room isn't ransacked the way you would expect to find it in a burglary. None of the jewelry is missing. The contents of Deborah's wallet all seem to be there. It's strange. There are some things out of place. Empty hangers in the closet. Has some clothing been taken? And if it has been, why?
Taking items or trophies from the place where a person is murdered, particularly if the killer is obsessed with the dead person, is a distinct possibility.
An empty hanger might just be that, an empty hanger. However, at this moment, no clue should be overlooked.
McKelvey notes that in addition to the gunshot wound to Deborah's chest, she has been beaten over the head with a blunt object. There are some broken bits of material on the bed that may have come from a gun butt. By the doorway, the detective sees that the front door lock has not been tampered with, and it is in perfect working order. Detectives conclude that whoever committed this crime locked the door behind them on the way out.
Deborah's keys are still hanging on the hook inside the door. Could the killer have possessed their own set of keys? All the windows are shut and locked tight. There's no sign of forced entry.
Who came to Deborah's home that evening and left this vivacious young nurse dead on her bed? On August 6, 1977, detectives are combing through Deborah Clark's Coral Gables townhouse, where she was shot and beaten to death 2 days earlier. There is no sign of forced entry into the home of the young blonde nurse. Some personal items are missing, but this does not appear to be a robbery.
But there's that one single dark hair, out of place.
Police contact Deborah's family members to let them know the terrible news. Her younger brother, Brian Pantola, is a sailor on the USS Lafayette, an SSB-16 nuclear ballistic class submarine docked at Holy Rock Port in Scotland.
The captain came down and he had a real stern look on his face. He says, "Hey, Officer Pantola, I need to see you in my stateroom." He was just, very straightforward, and he says, "Do you have a sister named Debbie?" And I said, "Yeah." And just no thought even came into my head. And he said, "Well, she's been killed."
Brian Pantola can barely comprehend what they're telling him.
Because we were close, and it just stunned me, shocked me. Anything you can imagine. The pain was just incredible.
Brian's Navy buddies do a whip around and pay for his emergency flight home to New York State.
I remember sitting on the plane. I was just sitting there numb. I can remember it like it was this morning.
Deborah's death will haunt her brother for years. Brian felt he should have done more after his sister was killed. As he once said of himself, "Your sister was murdered, and you did nothing."
When her belongings were brought home from Florida in a rental truck, I had to unpack them. There was fingerprint dust on everything, and it was so hard. The things that really struck my heart were when I opened up books she had, and then I saw like little flowers pressed between the pages of the book, and the sensitivity of her nature and her spirit came through, and it was crushing.
Time is already working against homicide investigators in Miami. Police are first called to Deborah's home by her friend and fellow nurse, Marianne LaRusso.
Marianne spent more than a day trying to find Deborah after she failed to turn up for a shift at the hospital.
By the time Miami police officer Thomas Guilfoyle finds Deborah's body in her bedroom on the evening of August 6th, she's already been dead for 2 days. Naturally, the whole ordeal has shaken Marianne quite badly, but she's happy to help police identify anything significant at the crime scene that might lead to the identity of her killer.
Police asked Marianne about the last time she saw Deborah. Was she unhappy at all? Was there anything wrong then?
Detective McElveen runs through the timeline with Marianne. He's taking careful notes. He shows her some photographs taken at the crime scene and asks her if anything looks amiss or out of place.
She studies the photos carefully and points out that some framed pictures of Deborah and her boyfriend, Alan Bregman, have been taken down from the walls.
She tells police she knows the pictures were there before Deborah was killed. Did the photos include images of the killer? These missing pictures could be keys to the investigation.
Police want to know if anything else of value is missing from Deborah's home, such as money, electronics, or jewelry.
A number of valuables are still in the townhouse. If Deborah's purse is untouched, we can pretty much rule out a robbery gone wrong.
On August 7th, 1977, Deputy Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Ronald K. Wright performs an autopsy on Deborah Clark's body.
Dr. Wright determines that the cause of death is the gunshot to the center of Deborah's chest. She also is being hit on the head with a blunt object.
The medical examiner confirms that there was no defensive wounds on Deborah's arm. Also, an examination of the fingernails revealed no signs of foreign skin. This means that there was no fight and there was no struggle prior to her being shot.
When Detective McElveen reviews the forensics report from Dr. Wright, he is convinced that whoever murdered Deborah was well known to her.
The likelihood this is a burglary gone wrong is ruled out at this time.
A title search of Deborah Clark's residence turns up an interesting fact. The property is owned by her boyfriend, Alan Bregman.
Bregman and his father are well-known real estate players in the local market. This is the same Alan Bregman who Marianne claims is in the missing framed picture in Deborah's home. And if Bregman owns the house, what are the odds he has a key to it?
Big-time Miami real estate agent Alan Bregman has just become suspect number 1 in the Deborah Clark murder case. Police call Alan Bregman in for questioning.
Detective McAlveen grills Bregman about the nature of his relationship with Deborah Clark.
He says they were friends, but denies that they had an ongoing sexual relationship. He does admit, however, that they slept together once or twice.
Detective McAlveen presents Bregman with evidence that perhaps he and Deborah were closer than he's letting on.
Police show Bregman the title deed to Deborah's residence. It's got Alan Bregman's name on it. Was she his mistress living in his little love nest?
But Alan is a prominent real estate agent. He has several properties in the area, and he says his friend Deborah just happens to be a renter. If she thought they were more than friends, then it was all in her imagination.
Alan Bregman is an avid boater who serves as a volunteer with the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary.
In the days before Deborah's murder, Bregman was taking part in a training course in the New York area.
If Bregman was out of Florida when Deborah was murdered, he may have a perfect alibi.
On August 6, 1977, a 23-year-old nurse, Deborah Clark, is found dead on her bed in her Coral Gables home 2 days after she missed a shift at a local hospital. Lead detective Stephen P. McAlveen quickly focuses his investigation on Alan Bregman, who was Deborah's clandestine lover and owner of the townhouse where she lived.
All signs point to Bregman, and if it wasn't him, then who could it have possibly been?
I thought it was him. The boyfriend was the defendant eventually. I thought so myself, based on he had a key, no forced entrance, no sexual battery of the victim, nothing stolen except the photos off the wall and his clothing.
But Alan Bregman is in New York on a Coast Guard training course in early August. Being out of Florida when Deborah was killed would give him a perfect alibi. But then, there is a stunning revelation.
It turns out that Bregman left his Coast Guard training course in New York early and flew home to Miami on August 4th.
Bregman landed around 2:30 p.m., giving him plenty of time to get to Deborah's townhouse before she was killed around 7:50 that evening.
No one heard Deborah and Bregman fighting, so it's hard to be sure exactly how events played out.
Why did Alan Bregman bring a gun to Deborah's apartment that morning? Did he know he was going to use it?
Deborah was found with blunt trauma head wounds, so we know that not only did he shoot her, he also beat her. There were fragments of a broken gun butt found on the bed, but the murder weapon was still missing from the room. Did Deborah fight back? She's a healthy young woman. You would expect her to.
When he shot her, apparently it severed her spine, so she was partially paralyzed as he beat her with the pistol.
After he shoots Deborah, Bregman hits her with his fist, with the gun butt, until it breaks into pieces.
The attack is just so vicious. Bregman brought a gun to Deborah's house, which makes me wonder whether the attack was premeditated. But whatever Bregman had in mind, Deborah didn't expect to be attacked by the man she loved.
The thing that really bothered me and made it stick with me, I think, right up until that evening, Deborah was in love with this man. She had told her friends, he's getting a divorce finally, we're going to get married, we'll be very happy.
This is a crime of passion committed by someone she loves, someone she trusts, someone who shoots her, and then he bludgeons her to death.
After he kills Deborah, Bregman has plenty of time to remove his personal effects from her townhouse.
Because he had 2 or 3 days before the police got there to get pictures off the wall, any incriminating evidence or clothes. He had plenty of time. Everything was gone, everything.
McAlveen wants to know why Bregman returned to Miami from his Coast Guard training 2 days before his course was due to end. Bregman tells police that he got a call while he was in New York, telling him that his wife was planning to begin divorce proceedings against him.
And he insists that none of his problems with his wife, Florence, have anything to do with Deborah.
But Florence filed for divorce from Alan on August 8th, just 2 days after Deborah's body was discovered.
Alan Bregman's motive for returning early to Miami may make sense in light of his failing marriage, but the fact remains, he is in Miami when the murder occurs.
McElveen brings all the evidence he has to the local district attorney, but the DA is unwilling to press charges against Alan Bregman.
With modern DNA technology and fingerprint technology, surveillance cameras everywhere, cell phone trackings and whatnot, today, making a case against Alan Bregman will be a lot easier.
Now, it's worth mentioning that Bregman is part of a powerful and wealthy family in the Miami area. He has access to top legal resources and will put up a formidable defense in court. And if the DA can't win, well, she doesn't want to go to trial. Miami in the late 1970s had the unhappy distinction of being one of America's murder capitals. It was a time when homicide detectives were overwhelmed by violent cases.
A couple years later, we were up to 600 murders, and it may have fallen between the cracks.
Unless McElveen can catch a break in the case, Deborah Clark's murder is likely to become just another cold case file on Miami's mounting list of unsolved murders.
The more time that goes by without a break in the case, the less likely it is the crime will get solved.
Maybe it was the caseload of the detectives. I know the homicide detectives always work long hours. It may have just been that the new hot cases came along and this one became cold.
But then, there is a break. Police learned that on August 8th, less than a week after her murder, Alan Bregman files an insurance claim on Deborah Clark's life for $148,000.
Now, you're talking roughly $150,000 in 1977. That's a lot of money back then. It's equal to about $1 million in today's money. This is a huge red flag.
Detective McElveen contacts Deborah's insurance company to learn more about her life insurance policy.
On April 1st, 1977, Deborah applied for a life policy through Allstate Insurance. It became effective on May 1st, 1 month later. At the time of the application, Deborah listed her sisters as the beneficiaries.
But it didn't stay that way. And on May 6th, shortly after the policy came into effect, Deborah requested in writing to have Alan Bregman named as the sole beneficiary.
If you're looking for a motive, just follow the money.
While the investigation continues into Deborah Clark's murder, her body is laid to rest.
You hate to see it. A young woman, full of life, cut short far too soon. Plus, the family must deal with the fact that her killing remains unsolved.
Many friends, family, and co-workers are in attendance at Deborah Clark's funeral. But one man, Alan Bregman, is nowhere to be seen.
Why isn't Bregman there? Is he too upset by the gruesome murder to attend? Does her family blame him for her murder? Or is it a guilty mind that keeps this man from paying his final respects to Deborah Clark?
Even with a pile of circumstantial evidence, including the life insurance policy that benefits Alan Bregman, the district attorney is still unwilling to press charges.
It's a judgment call for the prosecutors. On the page, the circumstantial case against Bregman looks fairly compelling, but a high-powered defense attorney could tear it apart.
And there is no murder weapon. There are no witnesses or any hard evidence linking him to the murder, at least nothing that would hold up in court in the late 1970s.
Detective McElveen shelves the case and moves on to other serious cases. And there is no shortage of crime in Miami in the late 1970s.
Drug crimes and homicides became an epidemic. Sometimes detectives like McElveen simply didn't have the luxury of pursuing a case properly.
It's a tough pill to swallow. You have all these pieces that paint a picture of Bregman as the killer.
Deborah Clark's family is heartbroken, and her case goes stone cold. Nearly 4 decades have passed since Deborah Clark's vicious murder. The case is colder than a slab in the morgue.
Couldn't not think about it, day to day to day. Little things would remind you, and then you try to shut it away, because of the pain. You try to push it down or push it away. and then it would come back, and then it would haunt you for a while.
No new information comes to light. No new suspects are investigated. Suspicion lingers over Alan Bregman.
Any hopes that there would be a break in the case melt away as the years and then decades go by. The case seems all but forgotten.
Some cases that cops just don't forget. This was one of them. But my career went on, and I was busy too. We were all busy in Miami back then. I would try to get with homicide and see what was happening. They were always too busy to really do anything.
Deborah's family believes Alan Bregman killed her, but they live 1,500 miles away. They're powerless to do anything about it.
One of the things that I'll never forget is how much guilt I felt as her brother at such a young age, because I had done nothing personally to avenge her death.
Detective Stephen McKelvey remains the lead investigator on this cold case until his death on December 30th, 2013. It looks like this might be the end of this sad story.
But not everyone has given up on this unsolved murder. And one person who can't forget has the power to do something about it.
I guess I was just persistent, and it was after I retired that I spoke with the new director, the boss, and he finally assigned it to homicide to the cold case detectives.
Perhaps because it was the first homicide he encountered on the beat, Deborah's murder has always haunted Thomas Guilfoyle.
In 1983, he became a legal advisor for Miami-Dade Police Department, and then later a major with the force. And he occasionally reminds the Homicide Bureau of the unsolved case.
People who come into contact with extreme violence often find that they can't leave the memory alone. In this case, the officer takes it as his personal responsibility to find justice for Deborah Clark.
In May of 2014, nearly 40 years after Deborah's murder, the file is taken over by Miami-Dade homicide detective David Denmark and his junior partner Jonathan Grossman.
The two detectives did a fantastic job. They reviewed everything and read all the old reports and found evidence and interviewed people. But it was very gratifying to me to see how hard they worked and how successful they were.
At the peak of the cocaine crime wave, people were being murdered almost daily. Dozens of unsolved murders in the Miami-Dade area deserve another look.
Deborah's case is one of the older unsolved murders that Detective Denmark is tasked with reviewing. He was just 8 years old when she was killed in 1977. Denmark and Grossman have some new investigative tools to apply to the case, which weren't available to police in the late 1970s.
Thanks to the advances of modern DNA technology and forensic science, detectives are really hopeful that old evidence can today provide new answers.
The file suggests there is only one suspect in the murder of Deborah Clark, Alan Bregman, and among the case evidence still on file in police storage, there is a bag that contains a single dark hair. After all this time, could a single hair be the one piece of vital evidence that finally cracks this cold case? Lead Detective Denmark and his partner Jonathan Grossman visit Deborah's younger brother, Brian Pantola, now 61 years old and living in Clayville, New York, in an effort to gain as much information as possible about his long-dead sister.
And I'm like, oh my God, somebody cares? What happened to my sister 40 years ago?
So much time has passed that a family can't help but try and move on and find peace with the fact that their beloved sister, daughter, and friend may never get the justice she deserves. And then here comes this detective out of the clear blue, telling him that they're pursuing Alan Bregman as a suspect. Talk about jarring.
Detective Denmark tells Deborah's brother they're there because the responding officer all those years ago, Thomas Guilfoyle, refused to give up on the case.
They finally heard him after 40 years. They gave the case to these detectives, and David and Jonathan got assigned.
Detective Denmark returns from New York and puts together a warrant that presents a compelling case to a judge in order to obtain fingerprints and a blood sample from Alan Bregman, containing his DNA.
Reviewing the case, it's obvious to Denmark that Bregman had motive, the insurance money, and the affair that threatened his marriage. And he had opportunity. He was in Miami at the time of the murder, and he has no alibi for the time of the killing.
According to Deborah's friends and family, Bregman lied about his relationship to Deborah. Friends said that the two were an item for more than a year and planned to get married. But he said they were just friends who had a tryst.
Consider that there was no forced entry into her home and Bregman had a key. Perhaps these elements will lead a new judge to give Detective Denmark the warrant he needs.
With the judge's authorization, police will be able to get a sample of Bregman's DNA and see if it matches the hair lying on top of Deborah's arm in 1977.
It can't be easy for Deborah's family just waiting while detectives go through procedures to obtain a DNA sample from Bregman.
But Deborah Clark's family has waited almost 40 years, and soon they may have an answer.
Time might create the illusion that people have forgotten, that they've moved on, but some things can't stay hidden forever.
Alan was protected by money and his father. He had a lot of high-class protection. We just thought, well, we're never going to find out. We always thought it was the boyfriend, but we're never going to get confirmation.
Detective Denmark is granted a warrant for a sample of Bregman's DNA and for his fingerprints.
You're standing on the shoulders of others, in a sense. A case like this is not made by one person.
You have Detective McAlveen and his original investigation, his meticulous logging of evidence that even makes this thing possible.
And then you have Thomas Guilfoyle, the first cop on the scene, the first time he encountered a murder victim, who has never forgotten what he saw on that August day in 1977.
All Detective Denmark can do is follow his work through to see what the DNA evidence will tell him. In 1977, all evidence points to Alan Bregman as Deborah Clark's killer. But detectives don't have the forensic tools to make a murder charge stick.
The case goes cold and is largely forgotten in the midst of the crime wave that hits Greater Miami during the late 70s and 80s.
It's not until 2014 that a new generation of detectives revisit the case with fresh eyes and scientific forensic methods that may finally solve this cold case.
By this time, Alan Bregman is 75 years old, remarried, retired, and living in Macon County, North Carolina.
In 2016, police detectives served Bregman with a warrant for his fingerprints and for a sample of his DNA.
I think he was shocked beyond belief at 40 years to have detectives knocking on your door.
Detective Denmark also orders a re-evaluation of all the physical evidence from the crime scene, and that is still in police custody. A partial fingerprint impression was collected from a heavy ashtray that was seized from Deborah's apartment back in 1977.
Modern forensic technology can help detectives solve cold cases, as long as evidence was collected by original crime scene investigators and preserved in storage. The results come back, and the fingerprint that was preserved on the bottom of the ashtray is a match. But Bregman has admitted he has been in Deborah's townhome, so of course it's no surprise that his fingerprints would be left on items inside.
Alan Bregman submitted to give police a known DNA sample. This DNA sample can be compared and hopefully matches that of the single black hair found on Deborah's body almost 4 decades ago.
The presence of Alan's black hair lying on top of Deborah's dead body would be much harder for anyone to explain away.
The owner of this single black hair is likely connected to her killing. When that hair dropped on her arm, she was likely already dead.
On August 4th, 2016, exactly 39 years after Deborah was killed, Alan Bregman is arrested and charged with Deborah Pantola Clark's murder.
After all these years, it's a very emotional thing to face a trial about someone you lost so long ago.
This is going to be a tough one, because it was all circumstantial.
In court, the prosecution must first take the jurors back to the late 1970s, a decade that some jurors are too young to recall.
If Bregman is the only suspect and circumstantial evidence points directly at him, why wasn't he charged back then?
It all comes down to DNA forensic evidence that is going to connect a single black hair collected from Deborah's body to Alan Bregman.
Prosecutors said that since Deborah was in her pajamas and lying on her bed, she was comfortable being with whoever killed her.
That single black hair was enough proof to show you that Alan Bregman was in fact in that bedroom that day.
Because if his story was he was hardly ever there, barely knew her, how did a piece of his hair get on her dead body?
Bregman's defense lawyer, Richard White, says the presence of the lone black hair proves nothing.
White argues that the location of where the hair was found is circumstantial, because Bregman was often in Deborah's townhome.
The prosecution has to be able to argue in court that the black hair kept as evidence was actually found on Deborah's arm 40 years ago. Thomas Guilfoyle is put on the stand.
They had a photograph of somebody pointing to Debbie's dead arm where the hair was found.
The hand in the photo was wearing a distinctive Rolex watch.
They and the prosecutor, Becky DeMeglio, made a point of it in front of the jury, and she said, "Do you still have that watch?" And I raised my hand and said, "Yes, I do."
On Friday, April 12, 2019, after a 2-week trial, the jury returns with their verdict.
At age 75, Alan Bregman is found guilty of second-degree murder with a firearm. Judge David J. Tunis sentences him to life in prison.
At the time, it was the oldest cold case ever resolved in Miami-Dade County.
Had it not been for that one stray black hair and Thomas Guilfoyle's persistence, Alan Bregman would never have been brought to justice.
I went in there crying, and I'm like, why don't I hate this person? This person killed my sister. But now I'm going to watch somebody lose their life. Not physically, but it's all over. He's lost his life as he knew it. And to me, that's very sad.
Thanks to the resolve of the Miami-Dade County Police, the senseless and violent murder of Deborah Clark that for decades left her killer free, until Alan Bregman was finally caught.